Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping into something pretty serious impacting our oceans.
Yeah, we're looking at stony coral tissue loss disease,
SCTLD for short.
SCTLD.
Cool.
Okay, I've heard about this. It sounds bad.
It is. It's this really devastating coral disease. First popped up near Miami back in 2014.
And it's spread since then.
Oh, definitely. All through the Florida Keys and now across, over 25 places in the wider Caribbean. It's moving fast.
And when you say devastating, what does that actually mean for the coral?
Well, it causes rapid tissue loss. You literally see the living tissue just sloughing off the skeleton.
Wow.
And the mortality rates are incredibly high for the corals that get it. We're talking 60, sometimes even 100% mortality in susceptible species.
That's staggering. One of the worst ever seen.
Pretty much, yeah. It's considered one of the most lethal coral diseases we've ever recorded.
And do we know what causes it? Like a specific bacteria or virus?
That's the tricky part. Despite a lot of research, the exact culprit, the specific pathogen, is still unknown.
Huh.
Well,
So theories. Well, the current thinking leans towards um, potentially bacteria, maybe even viruses, that could be affecting the symbiotic algae within the coral tissues. But nailing it down has been tough.
Right. So the purpose of this deep dive today is what exactly? We're looking at the spread.
Exactly. We want to explore kind of a predictive look at how SCTLD might expand globally, considering how it behaves, where corals live, ocean currents, and even things like shipping traffic.
Okay, let's break that down. How does it actually spread from coral to coral or area to area?
So locally, it seems to transmit through direct contact between corals.
Okay, like bumping into each other.
Yeah, and also through the water itself, the pathogen seems to be waterborne
Ah,
and possibly even hangs around in seafloor sediments.
sediments too. Interesting.
Yeah, and then there's the human factor boat. Ballast water is strongly suspected as a way it can jump much longer distances between regions.
Ballast water, right. Ships taking on water in one place and releasing it somewhere else.
Precisely. And the speed is, well, it's
So
alarming.
how fast are we talking?
Individual corals can lose tissue at rates of like 5 up to maybe 40 square centimeters per day.
Per day. That's incredible.
It is. And in terms of geographic spread, in Florida, it was moving maybe 7 to 10 kilometers a month. Down in Honduras, there were reports of it advancing up to 155 meters per day along the reef.
That's just relentless. Are all corals equally affected in the Caribbean?
No, definitely not. There's a clear difference in susceptibility.
Okay, who's getting hit hardest?
The highly susceptible ones tend to be the meandroid corals, pillar coral, elliptical star coral, the brain corals, labyrinthine corals, those sorts of big fleshy ones with complex surfaces.
Got it. And are any doing okay, relatively speaking?
Yeah, thankfully. There are species with low or apparently no susceptibility.
Yeah.
Things like singer corals, your elkhorn and staghorn corals, the Acropora species seem pretty resistant. Also bushy corals, tube coral.
Okay, so there's some variation. Now, let's zoom out globally. Where are the world's coral reefs concentrated?
Mostly in the tropics, between 30 degrees north and 30 degrees south latitude. They need that warm water, generally 22 to 29 Celsius, and low sediment clear water.
And the biggest concentration is?
The Indo-Pacific, by far, holds about maybe 75% of the world's reefs.
Wow, 3/4.
Yeah. The Caribbean has maybe around 10%, and then you have important areas in the Indian Ocean, the Red Sea. These environmental needs mean some regions are just naturally set up to be vulnerable if SCTLD were introduced.
Makes sense. And ocean currents. How do they connect these regions, especially from the Caribbean outwards?
Well, the Caribbean is like a major crossroads for currents. You've got the Caribbean current flowing through, feeding into the Florida current, then the Gulf Stream, which shoots up towards the North Atlantic,
So a direct link to the Atlantic.
a very strong link. Then you have the Antilles current mixing in, the Loop current and the Gulf of Mexico connecting things. Water even comes in from the South Atlantic via the North Brazil current. It's really well connected, especially to the Atlantic.
Which obviously presents a potential pathway for something waterborne like SCTLD.
A major potential pathway, yes.
Okay, besides natural currents, what about human transport? Shipping.
That's the other huge factor. Major naval traffic routes are critical to consider. Think Suez Canal, Panama Canal, Strait of Malacca.
The big bottlenecks.
Exactly. And many of the world's busiest ports, Singapore, Jebel Ali in Dubai, ports near the Great Barrier Reef in the Bahamas, are located near or within coral reef regions.
And the Panama Canal seems particularly worrying, connecting the Atlantic outbreak zone to the Pacific.
It's arguably the highest risk pathway for interocean transfer. directly links the currently affected Atlantic Caribbean region with the vast, potentially vulnerable Indo-Pacific.
Are there rules to stop diseases spreading this way, like for ballast water?
Yes, there are. The International Maritime Organization, the IMO, has its Ballast Water Management Convention, which came into force in 2017. The U.S. Coast Guard also has regulations.
And for stuff growing on the hull, biofouling.
Also, IMO guidelines for that, yes, aimed at minimizing the transfer of invasive species.
But are they effective against something like SCTLD, the specific pathogen?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Their effectiveness against potentially tiny bacterial or viral pathogens causing SCTLD is, frankly, uncertain. Some treatments, like UV treatment for ballast water, might not be 100% effective against all possible pathogens.
Okay. So regulations exist, but maybe not a silver bullet.
Not necessarily, no,
Hmm.
especially when the exact cause isn't pinned down.
So let's speculate. If SCTLD did make the jump, say, to the Indo-Pacific, how vulnerable might those reefs be? Have there been any tests?
There have been very limited experiments. One study did expose a few Indo-Pacific coral species, Cavonoclavis, Bacilloporus, Pitugia persilbata, to SCTLD, and it suggested they could be susceptible. They showed lesions.
So not immune.
Doesn't look like it, at
Yeah.
least for those tested. It's interesting, though, because Acropora, like staghorn and elkhorn, seem resistant in the Caribbean. And even within a species like Porates asteroids in the Caribbean, susceptibility can vary. It's complex.
What about places like the Red Sea? They're known for corals tolerant of high temperatures. Does that help?
Higher temperature tolerance is great for surviving warming events, but it doesn't automatically mean immunity to a specific disease like SCTLD. They might be vulnerable too.
And the Indo-Pacific just has so many species.
Exactly. Huge diversity, but importantly, it includes many of the same families and genera that are highly susceptible in the Caribbean.
Like the brain corals and their relatives.
Precisely. Plus, the Indo-Pacific already experiences coral diseases, like various white syndromes, which also cause tissue loss, and sometimes involve bacteria like Vibrio. This suggests their corals are susceptible to these kinds of tissue loss diseases generally.
Okay, so the potential is definitely there. How do scientists try to predict where it might go? What kind of modeling do they use?
There are various approaches, borrowing from how we model marine invasive species or even epidemics on land. You have hydrodynamic models looking at water movement.
Currents and dispersal.
Right. Then epidemiological models for how the disease itself progresses and spreads through a population. And species distribution models that map out where vulnerable corals actually live.
So you kind of layer them together.
Ideally, yes. A combination is probably best for SCTLD. Using hydrodynamics for how the pathogen might travel via currents or shipping, epidemiology for the disease dynamics, and species distribution to pinpoint the high-risk habitats.
But it's not perfect yet. What are the limitations?
Big limitations still. Primarily, we don't fully understand all the transmission routes, especially the role of water and sediment, needs more clarity.
Okay.
And then there's the variable susceptibility between species, which makes it hard to predict the impact accurately. Plus, all these factors, currents, shipping, susceptibility, maybe temperature interact in complex ways.
So putting it all together, what's a sort of conceptual model for global expansion look like right now?
Well, you integrate those key factors. Ocean currents connecting the Caribbean to other basins, major naval traffic routes acting as potential vectors, especially the Panama Canal.
The big shortcut.
Yeah. And then you overlay the distribution of coral species globally, highlighting regions with species known or suspected to be susceptible, maybe based on Caribbean data or taxonomic similarity, or even where diseases like white syndrome already occur.
And factoring in the ballast water biofouling management, but acknowledging its potential limits.
Exactly. So this conceptual model would flag Indo-Pacific regions that have high naval connectivity to the Caribbean, particularly via Panama, and also host coral communities, similar to those getting hit hard now, as being a particularly high risk.
Even the Red Sea isn't totally off the hook, despite maybe temperature tolerance.
Correct. Risk is likely lower, perhaps, than the directly connected Indo-Pacific, but not zero.
This paints a pretty sobering picture. What's the main takeaway?
I think the key message is that SCTLD represents a really significant global threat to coral reefs.
Yeah.
It's not just a Caribbean problem anymore, or potentially won't be for long.
And because we don't know the cause or exactly how it spreads?
We urgently need better predictive tools. We need to anticipate where it might show up next so we can try to inform monitoring and maybe possibly conservation or intervention strategies. This conceptual model is a starting point for assessing that risk.
So what needs to happen next? research-wise?
Definitely more experimental work.
Hmm.
We desperately need studies testing the susceptibility of a wider range of Indo-Pacific corals. That's critical.
Okay.
And further research into the effectiveness of ballast water and biofouling management, specifically against SCTLD pathogens. Plus, of course, continuing the effort to identify the actual causative agent.
And refining those predictive models.
Absolutely. Developing more sophisticated models that can better integrate all these complex factors with more detailed data as it becomes available.
It really underscores how interconnected everything is in the ocean, doesn't it? Currents, shipping, biology.
It really does.
So, a final thought for you listening. Given this interconnectedness and the real potential for rapid, widespread impact if SCTLD continues its march, what proactive measures could we realistically implement now to try and safeguard vulnerable coral ecosystems around the globe before it potentially arrives on their doorstep? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.